Hi, it's Tuesday. This is a special edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. And there we are, proper seating arrangement. I'm John, as you can see from the picture too, and Jeremy, that's you over there on that side. How you doing today?
I'm good.
Okay, let's get right into it. This has been something that's I've been thinking about, following the news, very closely. And so what's in the news? Obviously heat has been in the news, and the whole discussion of the immediate heat as well as the climate change and records being set. Israel is in the news as well, North Korea, and a very strange and hopefully not sad situation involving a young serviceman. Other issues, obviously Russia and Ukraine and so on, dominating the news. But as I look over the past 10 days at the news aggregators and the mainstream news, what's not in the news is Joe Biden's age, which is very interesting. And it makes me wonder, has the president turned a corner? I'm not going to go so far as to say that there's a Biden renaissance, because I don't think there's any news to support that. But I am going to say that it's been about 10 days. Mm-hmm. That age has not been a dominant issue. When in reference to the president, the issues have been rate of inflation going down, the numbers of new applicants for unemployment going down, plateauing, very low. His approval ratings stuck, the low 40s. But on the other hand, where there is some bad news, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis not having a very good 10 days, the Republicans kind of in a mess, in some disarray, and new polls showing not huge margins, but the president leading Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, anywhere from 2 to 7 points. What do you think? Are we on to something? Has the president turned a corner?
That's interesting. Turn the corner. It's possible, but I'll take a longer view of that. But first, a theme jumped in my head, and Biden is of the establishment. I mean, I say that because he's been a senator since the 1970s. He knows Washington, D.C. inside and out. But what's fascinating is just looking at a longer picture as opposed to 10 days. Let's just look at, the whole summer. It kind of looks like it's Biden versus the establishment, doesn't it? And
now, are we talking Hunter and...
Well, there's that, but I mean, I think there are members within the party who want him out. Mm-hmm. But that's Biden himself and his wife and his family are obviously going to not be for that. Mm-hmm. And Biden is going to hold this out as long as he can. His wife is going to hold it out as long as she can, and those very close to them. And so there's this circle of dedicated Biden who are of the establishment, but they are going up against another wing of the establishment who would like to see somebody new and fresh. And that's kind of like what I think is as a backdrop. Now, well, let me leave it at that, and then if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I do, because as with pretty much anything we discuss, there are lots of little details and nuances. And what's really intriguing to me are a couple of things. We spent a couple of our podcasts discussing Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. We see her really out front right now, especially on issues of civil rights, issues of textbooks. She's kind of like the point person taking on Florida and transgender issues and textbook issues and so on, and looking rather dynamic in the process, and maybe a niche for her, although once again, her numbers don't seem to be moving. The other thing I think relevant to Joe Biden is the fact that it's still probably not in his best interests to pull out of the race. I mean, you have, some of the pundits, Maureen Dowd, for example, of the New York Times, and former speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, who did a senior moment, it'll come to me, but a woman who was a brilliant speechwriter, Peggy Noonan, there you go, suggesting this is the time for the president to show some statesmanship and to say, hey, look, I got some things accomplished and I promise to be a transition to the future. But imagine, you're the sitting president, you've had success, you've got an agenda, you really hurt your party right now if you step down. He's a lame duck. A lame duck in July, a year and several months before the election. So he's got a few months to drag this out if that's what he's if he's inclined to step down.
And I think that's totally true. In other words, it would be it would almost be amateur. It would be I mean, for somebody to hold the perception, the expectation that he needs to step down right now. But this is part of a larger reality that there's this battle within the party, and I think I'm not going to get into the Hunter thing. It's out there enough, but the timing of that, being, so the age issue, exit stage left, Hunter Biden and some criminal activity, go right to the stage and take a big, part of the audience's view. But then put that aside and look at just the economy. And, I saw a survey a week ago. It was done in March, and it said that 57% of Americans in a pinch, in an emergency, couldn't access $1,000.
Yes.
So there's that. I saw another survey, and I think this is intriguing because, baby boomers are, you put them to one side, and I think in terms of the history of generations, they have probably amassed the most wealth in the history of human history, and especially in the Western world, the United States and Asia growing. But look at Gen X. I think they're the ones to look at because they're going to become in 10 to 15, 20 years the oldest age cohort. And a study showed just a few months ago that the average Gen Xer only has 4,000 put away, and that the higher tier had about 40,000 put away, which means they're not going to be able to work. So they're starting to feel that pinch now, that realization. And I don't think that age cohort is going to be behind Biden because of just what we've seen in terms of the longer picture of inflation.
Maybe not, but by the same token, if you look at Gen Xers, there are other things going on besides personal finance and economics and job availabilities. This is the most gender neutral group. I mean, we saw and conducted, in fact, early surveys. We're talking several years ago, where what struck me was that 40% of Gen Z is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Gen Z individuals do not buy clothes based on gender.
But to your point about Gen X are the parents of Gen Z. Gen X are raising those. That's the point.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm talking Gen Z now, and I'm sorry if there's any confusion. So that plus the fact that Gen Z is also the most racially mixed of any the percentages of Latinos and of blacks, of Asians and of mixed, are altogether over 60% are non-white, and that in itself, even if they're not enamored with Joe Biden, The issue would be more how much are they willing to not vote as opposed to tilting Republican, especially if the Republicans are going to be a white party, and that's what it looks like they are.
Yeah. And I think by the sheer numbers, that'll be the case for at least 10 to 20 years. But, okay, so let's do a lightning round. And before we go on to, what's the best data point pointing to Joe Biden?
I would say one that I didn't mention, consumer confidence index is up 6 points over the last quarter measurement. That's a pretty substantial jump. Now, will there be another increase the next quarter? Not yet a trend, but I think that's what he's got going for him. Mm-hmm. Maybe perceptions among consumers are better, and that certainly helps an incumbent.
Yeah. I'm going to share one I read this morning.
All right.
And I knew about this in his first 100 days, but I didn't know about this 900 days. If you're going on a 900-day average, he has the second lowest favorable rating in U.S. modern presidential history, 39%. Carter's much worse, like 28% or something like that. And his favorable, and then unfavorable, 55%. And so underwater, 16 points.
Continuing the lightning, but November of 2022, even with a lower rating, Democrats, Democrats, the party outside of power in Congress, managed to stem the historical tide and actually did not lose as many seats as were expected that they would lose. So the point is that, relatively speaking, Joe Biden's doing better than the other side right now.
Yeah, Joe Biden is up against the Republican clown show. But I would ask this, because in 2022, in the battleground states, those candidates many of them were getting behind the election denial, which clearly wasn't helping them in the independent camp. The question is, going into 2024, will they learn their lesson? What will be both the internal brand and message that they communicate or project rather, and what will be the interpretation of that among voters? Will it go anywhere near election? I don't think so. I think that's old news. I don't think that's really a big thing being pushed as much anymore.
Well, you remember that the former president, Donald Trump, probably on his way to several more indictments, some of which Georgia, and then, of course, the Beyond the Documents case, the January 6th case, and issues of sedition are going to be major headlines, and are going to throw these Republican primaries into turmoil. On one hand, Trump will still continue to have his base, maybe a little bit smaller, but continue to have his base. Meanwhile, the other candidates kind of being forced into a situation where they either have to mildly side with the president so as not to alienate the Republican base, or they're going to have to reject Trump, and that is not much of a choice for them.
I mean, I'm interpreting what you're saying as Biden still looks a little more professional, despite the fact that there are people within his party trying to oust him, get rid of him.
I'm going to say, as a fellow older gentleman, I think he's looking pretty good. Sure, I worry. I see him shuffle. I see him a little shaky. I've seen him make gaffes, although I have 45 years, I have 50 years, actually, of watching Joe Biden, even as a young man, making gaffes. There's clearly a slowdown there. How big of an impediment is it? If these last 10 days continue, maybe Americans are willing to put up with that slowing down than to, as you pointed out, and we will get cards and letters about the clown show is on the other side, I think.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I also believe that there is a Democratic clown show. I was just interpreting your words. I think on the issue of Biden and his age and this notion of he can't continue, I'm going to say it's going to be clear by the fall.
Yeah.
It'll be clear by the fall.
We'll have to see if these are trends or not. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, Republicans will vote in Iowa. Well, Democrats will too. We'll see. Okay. Lightning round.
Okay.
We have never really talked about artificial intelligence and its impact.
Yeah.
And obviously we're going to have to talk about it in some detail. But you have some numbers. How troubled are you about the injection of artificial intelligence into U.S. politics? And how troubled, according to numbers that you have, are American voters?
Well, I see this onslaught, and the onslaught began with the very introduction of COVID. I mean, people were talking about AI before. We were at a big conference in November of 2019, weeks as COVID is going around in China. Okay, around that time we were talking about AI, but AI really started to jump into my interpretation, that spring semester of COVID, that spring going into the summer. And now the last couple months, last month has just been the dam busting or bursting. And so, I wrote in a report in October of 2020, I said I wouldn't be surprised if a deep fake came out in the weeks, days leading up to the election. I saw a trajectory of intense October surprises, a trend, I should say, and we were kind of entering an absurd era anyway. And so to me, it didn't seem out of the ordinary, but I think I was a little too early. Now you're seeing headlines about AI and writing news, and more stories about deep fakes. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by 2024 that actually occurs in some way or another. Now, about our poll, I wanted to know what voters thought in general. I just wanted a baseline question. Are they fearful or hopeful of it? And I'll just share a couple details because we're gonna send out the article with this podcast. But half of voters are fearful, and a little under a third of voters are hopeful. And one other data point I think is very interesting. Not only is the divide between men and women, and you can look at the details of that, but age really stood out too. And that you would think 18 to 29-year-olds, right?
Yeah, I was surprised.
Because of their immersion in the digital world, would be more in the camp of AI. But in terms of an outlook of fearful versus hopeful, they more or less mirrored the overall results, which were half of them were fearful of it, and really only a quarter of them were hopeful about it. And so my interpretation of that is, the tendency of perhaps people to think that because they were brought up digitally that they would make that leap. My interpretation is maybe they wouldn't mind a future where digital was a little less invasive. And by digital, I mean the direction of AI.
Yeah, and I was surprised when I saw the 18 to 29-year-old reaction, which kind of bridges younger millennials and older Gen Z. Except I recall in earlier research on millennials in particular, on the issue of privacy, the theme that came out was we don't want government or corporations interfering in our private lives. We'll mess up our own private lives on our own. And so I think you got a little bit of this now. Same sort of thing where, yes, artificial intelligence is part of our lives. Yes, we're going to be part of it. We're going to be working alongside, or we're going to be watching, but we're going to be impacted by it. By the same token, it has to be reined in, or it could be very threatening. We know that firsthand. This is them talking.
Yeah.
Okay, good conversation, more to come. So, as a reminder to folks out there, you got the podcast, but Jeremy has written a brief analysis of our poll findings on AI and its potential impact on folks. That'll be in the same email that we send out. Always go to our website, johnzogbystrategies.com. Click on podcasts or click on whatever to get some information. I'm all set.
Insights and news. Have a good week. Have a good day.
Okay.